everybody knew this was coming.
Yes.
We were sounding the alarm about this issue. The court order was not yesterday. The court order was not Monday. The court order was about a month ago. We had financial services hearings about it. Members were ringing alarm to the administration about it. There have been public statements about it, asking for all of us, White House and Congress, to move on this sooner. The fact that this statement came out just yesterday is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. I want to make that very clear, because the excuses that we've been hearing about it, I do not accept them. But secondly, what we have here, and when we have members within our own caucus threatening to go on vacation and imperiling the lives of millions of people, is unacceptable. Is unacceptable. And so we need to make sure that we get this passed. We cannot leave town until we protect people's ability to stay in their homes. And we need to push on governors who have not been getting the emergency rental assistance out in time. There are some constituents there are some constituencies and municipalities that have been getting it out more effectively, others less effectively, but the fact of the matter is, states across the board, red and blue, have not been getting this money out. We have authorized a total of $46 billion in emergency rental assistance, and only $3 billion has gone out so far. No matter whose fault it is, the fact of the matter is that what was promised to people has not been given. And as long as those funds remain tied up in whatever elected officials of whatever party's hands, we cannot kick people out of there. There cannot be an eviction. There cannot be mass eviction.
Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I know it is harder to end a war than start one in this town. So I thank you and the President for ending our longest war. Over the weekend, both the New York Times and Washington Post reported that August 29th drone strike that supposedly prevented a car bomb attack at the airport in Kabul instead killed Samari Ahmadi, an aid worker, and his family. The strike happened when there was a lot of eyes on Kabul, but it's not unusual for U.S. drone strikes to kill civilians. It is not unusual for the U.S. government to claim it killed terrorists instead. And this is coming on the heels of reporting that DOD failed to spend a single dollar of the redress payments that Congress has provided for civilian casualties. As Congress considers the continuing utility of the 2001 AUMF, how can you possibly ensure us that our drone strikes and over-the-horizon capabilities will actually reach their targets?
First, when it comes to moving forward, I hope that we can again take this up in a different setting and different session. I know with regard to the drone strike that you're referring to, that is being looked at very, very, very carefully by others in the administration, so that we understand exactly what happened or what didn't happen. And no country on earth, no government takes more effort, takes more precautions to try to ensure that anyone other than the intended terrorist target is struck using a drone or by any other means. But certainly we know that in the past, civilians have been hurt and have been killed in these strikes. And we have to make sure that we have in place every possible measure to allow us to continue to use the tool to defend and protect ourselves while avoiding anyone on the civilian side from being hit. And we also need to look, as you rightly said, at the authorizations going back to 2001 and 2002. We strongly support that. Those need to be updated to reflect present realities, not the reality as it was in 2001 or 2002.
And Mr. Secretary, from the State Department's point of view, what is the impact of the unaccountable uncountable and accountable civilian harm on our counterterrorism goals?
It certainly runs counter to those goals. Whenever there are civilian casualties, whenever there are unintended injuries or deaths, it does not advance what we're trying to do. And so that's besides the moral obligation we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that civilians are not harmed or killed. It's also true that in terms of the mission itself, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen, because if people lose faith and confidence in it, if they, and particularly in the countries in question, if people see it as a tool to do harm to innocent civilians as opposed to terrorists who are a threat to everyone, that will undermine support for what we're doing.
And in your role and previous roles in other administrations, how much of an analysis is being done to look at whether our counterterrorism efforts are actually being counter to the work that we are trying to do in ending terrorism around the world?
I would call it very, very significant. Certainly in the Obama administration, we spent a tremendous amount of time looking at, reviewing, and modifying all of these procedures, all of the safeguards, all of the criteria that went along with using these tools. And we've been in the midst of conducting just such a review in this administration to make sure, to the best of our ability, that when we take a strike, we get the intended person and no one else.
Gentlelady's time is.
Thank you so much, Chair, Senator Knight and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, for inviting us to come and speak to our Indigenous communities here in Minnesota. It was heartbreaking yesterday to hear a mother break down in tears talking about the future for her daughters. It was heartbreaking to hear a 13-year-old speak about the fact that he has a right to live and to have access to wild rice, which gives him economic stability in a future. And so much of those stories, I think, are yet to be told in regards to Line 3 and the devastation to our tribes and the devastation to our land and our climate. I think it's really important that President Biden understands that this decision around being silent is devastating these communities. It is hurting them. And if anything, especially because the experience that we've had in Michigan is that Enbridge believes they're above the law. They're not. They are not above the law. They had a right to notice, which was flawed here. They had a right to be able to have their treaties abided by, and they weren't here. They had a right to understand exactly what was literally behind closed doors, what those decisions were being made, and they weren't. And these are families and communities that are fighting just like any of us are to a future, to a better quality of life, and so much more. And all of that is being cut short because corporate greed is coming, capitalism is coming before the livelihood of people that have lived off this land. I think it's important as I come into this space that I shared with all of you, our experience with Enbridge in Michigan. There is no safe way to do this work that they continue to say. I mean, we see it during their construction period, and we're going to continue to see it moving forward. This is unsafe. This is going to impact not only our climate, y'all, but also our water, our access to clean drinking water. And just again, I just thank you all for being vulnerable and talking so much about that truth, about the fact that you're not going to be able to provide wild rice, to be able to provide for your families, the fact that you are worried about the land and all the harm that comes with putting this devastating pipeline through it. So I just want you all to know, I heard you even this morning saying we just need a voice. And it's unfortunate that folks here in the state have turned their backs on these Indigenous communities. But I'm not going to, and I know my colleagues stand with me in saying that we're going to continue to fight and hold President Biden accountable in understanding this is directly impacting our climate, but it also that no corporation, no matter how much money or influence they have, are above the law, and treaties must be respected. Thank you. With that, our wonderful advocate from Missouri, who constantly is centered on saving lives, and this is so interconnected with her mission. With that, Cori Bush.
Yeah, thank you. So there was a report out of Politico this morning, actually, that the president has asked his education secretary to create a memo looking into his legal authority to forgive loans or cancel the loan debt. Wanted to get your reaction to that and what steps need to happen beyond.
First, the last amount that it's my understanding that President Biden had proposed was $10,000.
Until now,
and-
to 50,000 according to this report.
Well, that's great because in all the conversations that I've been a part of with impacted people, they see that $10,000 as not even interest. Congress gave President Biden the authority through the Higher Education Act to cancel debt. And so while we have introduced resolutions and legislation to get at this, why should the American people continue to struggle under the weight of this and wait for a legislative process when President Biden, with the stroke of a pen by executive action, authority given to him through the Higher Education Act, can immediately mitigate this hurt? And again, this is critical to a just, robust, and equitable recovery from this pandemic. This is the moment. This does jumpstart the economy. And it's about the recovery, it's economic justice, it's racial justice, it's generational justice. And these goals are all consistent with the things that have been verbally expressed by this administration that they want to do. I'm in ongoing communication with the White House, and I'm grateful that those lines of communication remain open. I've been encouraged by those conversations, but I told them, listen, if you're going to speak to the role that Black women have played on the ballot and at the ballot box, Black women are the most educated and the most burdened by student debt. So you can say the words of appreciation. Policy is my love language. Cancel student debt. So he has the authority and, moreover, the mandate, a decisive mandate from the diverse coalition that elected him.
And Jillian has one last question.
From New York has 9 minutes remaining. Gentleman from Ohio has 7 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Bowman.
Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was 11 years old when the police beat the crap out of me. 11 years old, 6th grade. What threat did I pose other than that of a child who was horseplaying in the street? My mother and I did not feel empowered to take any recourse because in our community, the police unfortunately operate as an occupying force. I thank God that I'm alive to tell this story. Unfortunately, George Floyd is not alive. Philando Castile is not alive. Tamir Rice is not alive. Aiyana Jones slept in her apartment on her couch. She was 7 years old. Police came in with a no-knock warrant and murdered her. This is about transparency and accountability, and we should pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in a bipartisan way. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Ohio.
St. Louis, and I thank you, Chairman Cohen, for convening this hearing. It is both an honor and a profoundly sobering privilege to be sharing space with you and to Mr. Van Ellis, to Mother Fletcher and Mother Randall, with them as well. I hope to be able to actually meet them. When I go home today, and this is to them, when I go home today, I will call my 7-year-old nephew and tell him about my day. I will tell him that I got to see and hear American heroes today. I will tell him that I spoke to them and all that they lived all those things that they talked about and how they lived in a neighborhood much like his in St. Louis, that he lives in a neighborhood with local schools just like they did, and favorite parks where he spends his holidays the same way they do, and where he celebrates some of his life's most precious moments the same way that they did. But unlike in his neighborhood in St. Louis, this vibrant, beautiful community in Tulsa was burned down. And yet, Mother Fletcher, Mother Randall, and Mr. Van Ellis are still here with us today, sharing that story of courage. To my colleagues on this committee, there is only one reason why descendants of the Tulsa massacre have not been compensated, and that reason is racism. It's anti-Black racism, to be clear, and it's been stated a couple times, and I want to state it again. It's anti-Black racism. Racism is not just slavery and Jim Crow. It is the daily violence that is enacted on our communities each and every day we live in this white supremacist society. Racism is when a group of our elders come to our halls to testify about the massacre they survived without any clear commitment from our leaders as to the reparations they are owed. That is outright racism, full stop. What happened in Tulsa on the evening of May 31st and that continued into the day of June 1st, 1921 was a failure of the highest proportions. For 24 hours, the community was under attack, traumatized, brutalized, terrorized, and killed for no other reason than for being Black. It was the failure of our government that helped enable the violent massacre. It was the failure of our leaders for being complicit in white supremacist violence. It was the failure of our country for failing to protect its own citizens. It is a failure only made possible because racism is alive and well in this country. It was alive when a white mob burned Tulsa to a crisp. It is alive now as we debate the merits of repairing harm. Underlying the generational trauma and exploitation is a government that refused to even acknowledge the humanity of our ancestors, enslaved and terrorized under white supremacy. A government that to this day refuses to acknowledge or atone for its own ongoing racism. So let me ask Ms. Goodwin, how has your family, if you could just tell us briefly, how has your family's history been affected by the Tulsa massacre? And then I have a question for Ms. Crutcher. Ms. Goodwin, how has your family's history been affected by the massacre? If you could name like 3 things that are like really stick out.
Well, one sticks out is the generational wealth that could have been basically accrued by now. There was some $76,244 back in 1921, in today's dollars, that has been said to be some 900,000 or perhaps 1.2 million.
My goodness.
So if we just talk about the material loss, that's what you would deal with. If you want to talk about the scars and the, as it's been said over and over again, the ongoing trauma, we feel this every day because we live in this community. And as it's been said, we see a community that's being gentrified. We see a community right now with this massacre is being monetized by Greenwood Rising and all of this hoopla, and are the 3 folks that we could do right by right now are still living. And so I can say to you that we feel that, okay?
Yes.
And when you say 3 things, I can name 30 things.
Okay, right? I'm running out of time, but
okay.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Ms. Crutcher. I only have a few seconds left, but could you tell us, what does justice look like to you in your community? Thank you for sharing what you shared for us today, but if you could say what justice is for Tulsa right now, what is that?
Justice is simply restitution, repair, and respect. And those 3 words. That's what justice looks like.
Thank you. I want to end my remarks by talking directly to all the Black people, the young people who are listening to this discussion today. Know that this country's legacy of racism is still alive today. Our lives, our very existence is a testimony. It's a testament to our will and our strength. It is a testament to our power as a people and how much has stood in our way, in the way of our survival. And yet we are still here. We saw 3 people. They are still here. We are fighting for a world that honors our dignity and our humanity, and know that we will always do this work of liberation and justice for each and every person until it is won. Thank you. Thank you.
That concludes today's hearing. And I'm going to conclude it in the most unusual manner in that I'm going to advertise a television show.